Podcast this week. I like filming my shows and my interviews, and I still don't have my studio set up, even though I promised myself I would. But I wanted to make sure I did it right and that I got all the equipment set up accordingly. Because as you can see, well, for those watching the video, in my new house, the ceilings are very high, and I have hardwood floors, so it's really echoey. So for the time being, I'm just going to conduct this week's show. Kind of gonna fly solo once more. This week was a real reflection point for me. In the last 6-7 years of sort of building my online businesses, I've gone through a couple of different stages, I would say. And within each one of those stages, I've learned new lessons and taken some new approaches with those lessons. And in reflecting this week, and especially this weekend, because Juliana was in Kentucky for the weekend, and I basically just had, some time to kind of sit around and spend some time to myself and really think. And in reflection, I'm starting to see all of these different lessons and all these strategies I've taken sort of come together and meld and bend and melt into each other to form sort of one unified philosophy behind how I choose to build online businesses and how I choose to build even a business that's not online and everything that falls under that. So, that could consider team building and management of people and managing my own personal finances and investing, whether that's in other companies or in the stock market, what have you. And then if I really want to get into it, it could also kind of culminate between just positive lifestyle choices in general, such as my health and my fitness and my diet. And, am I taking enough time to myself and my relationships and on and on and on. When I first decided to take the plunge with starting my own business, I was a contractor. I grew up doing contracting work, and especially in my late teens, I worked for a carpenter / contractor. His name was Mike Thornton. He was a really, really amazing man, and he taught me a lot. Unfortunately, at that point in my life, I was not necessarily in the right mind frame to absorb all the lessons that he was teaching me, but nonetheless, a lot of what he taught me stuck in my mind, and it stayed there and it sort of ruminated. And so I would go to work with him, and when I got home, I would just do side work. I would do side jobs. And that was my first experience on building an LLC and on invoicing and on pricing jobs out. And I just basically watched Mike and I copied everything that he was doing. So I would watch him when we went to a job before we actually started it to take measurements and figure out how much product and how much materials we would need to do the job. Measure out, square footage of flooring or maybe of a wall, so we would know exactly how many boards or 2x4s or 2x6s to put up. So my first lesson was very, very fundamental. My first lesson was simply about knowing what you're doing before you actually commit to doing it. And I was fortunate that I was able to start off on that in that sort of foundation, and that bottom level foundation of what it takes to build a business. And the point of all that is Mike taught me, if you get your numbers correct in the beginning, you can ensure that you're going to make more money than you spend. And all said and done, in the grand scheme of things, I think that's basically the most important lesson that you can learn when it comes to building a business: revenue and expenses. And if your revenue is more than your expenses, then you've built a profit. Now we can get all into, like investment capital and burning cash and churn rate and playing in the negatives and all that. For the sake of this video and for this podcast, we're not going to go there. We're just going to start with that simple foundational lesson that, in my opinion, a successful business is one that makes more money than it spends. When I moved to Florida and when I first got introduced to online business, that was when I really took the approach of the grind mentality. I told myself that I was going to read more books, I was going to watch more videos, I was going to create more content, I was going to spend more hours building my website than anybody else could possibly keep up with. And even though it was just myself, and I knew that I had a chip on my shoulder because I was kind of competing against other websites that had teams and agencies and what have you, I was able to take that mindset, that sort of blue collar mindset that I grew up with, and apply it to a digital methodology. And that was also a very good lesson, because I learned that there is something to the notion of being the hardest worker in the room. There is something to that. If you show up somewhere and you're willing to do more than the next guy or gal is, then it is the culmination of those extra minutes and those extra hours that after months or even years really, really adds up. And I learned that the mistake people make is they say, I'm going to be the hardest worker today. And then tomorrow I have a headache. And then the next day I'm just going to kind of work another 8 hours. It's not about that. And it's not even necessarily about working like 24-hour shifts at a time. It's about every single day committing to more than the next person. So let's say you work. And I'm not talking about showing up at a job. I'm talking about actually working. I'm talking about being productive for 8.5 hours a day, while all the people around you and all the people you're competing with are kind of working for 6 hours a day, probably a half hour to an hour, probably more, honestly, each day. They're playing on social media. They're going out to lunch. They're stepping outside to smoke cigarettes and, I don't know, vape, probably. So, and let's even assume that you're competing against somebody that works a full 8 hours and really focuses those 8 hours. So after just 5 days, you have 2.5 hours more time, more production that has been inserted into your craft and into your business. And that's assuming that you're competing against somebody that's actually working 8 hours a day, when in reality, most of the people that you're either competing with within your own job, within your own company, or competing businesses, they're only really working like 3 hours a day. And it's sad to say that, but that's the reality. That's what the data says. That's what, online surveys and data mining say. People go to work and they don't do a whole lot anymore. And I learned very, very quickly that if I was willing to make myself extremely uncomfortable, that I would accelerate myself further than everybody else. And there's something to that. And I'm glad that I learned that lesson second, because that lesson is a little bit counterintuitive. Or not counterintuitive, is contradictory to some of the other lessons that I've learned and have subsequently applied. Moving on. So that probably brings me, I probably did the head down, nose to the grindstone, sacrifice my entire life, work ethic for I'd say 3.5 to 4 years. It's only until probably more than that, probably 5 years. It's really only until like 2015 that I started working into this third stage, you might call it, which is outsourcing, which is consolidating, so eliminating extra tasks, which is based more on focus and less about busyness. And finally, which is focused on leveraging technology to do work for me. And it's been great. It's been really great. I still like to consider myself the hardest worker in just about every room I go to, but I no longer see that as some kind of ridiculous sort of minimal threshold where I need to sacrifice everything in order to be successful. In this newer stage, I've been able to more accurately and more effectively apply my skill set on a higher level and assign and delegate the more labor intensive skills I need to other people. Two things to say here. This delegation system that I've fallen into doesn't necessarily require more money, because if you make a certain amount of money in the 8 hours worth of grind that you're talking about, and let's say you take 1/4 of that money and you delegate it out, that means that you take 1/4 of that money and you use it to delegate all your assignments. So let's say 1/4 of the money that you were making in your 8-hour day, you're spending to completely free up your 8-hour day. Now you still have another 8 hours to start over on something else. So in this sort of delegation mindset that I've fallen into, I've learned that it's not the money that is important. The money is simply a resource that helps you build other things. It's the time. So you buy time. You quite literally take money and you buy time with it. And I am extremely grateful and extremely happy that I learned that lesson, because it became apparent to me that if I stayed on the route that I was on, I was going to be one of those men that, was probably at some point divorced, probably not very healthy because I didn't allow myself time to take care of my fitness and take care of my health and my body, that I was probably going to be lonely at some point because I wasn't allocating time for relationships. And I was probably going to be one of those men that, turned 40, turned 45, had gotten everything that I set out to, and realized that I sacrificed all the experiences in exchange for security. There was a book called The E-Myth, which I talk about a lot. Which really, really helped me learn how to build processes in my agency, especially in Stodzy, in my online marketing agency, and how to build out departments and how to assign people specific tasks so that if something comes in, you have all of your tasks assigned, you have all of those assignments documented, so that if somebody doesn't necessarily remember how to do something, you can always go back into the documentation and learn, and how to separate all of the sub departments of the entire agency, so that if one department needs something from another department, there's overlap and communication, so that the whole thing can work symbiotically with each other. And once I did that, it took a long time for me to do, and it was like a very stressful process. It was stressful because I had to let go of the control that we all, the business owners and entrepreneurs, especially people that have built something from nothing, we feel very passionate about. It's your baby, you know, it's like this thing that you helped grow from just a tiny little seed. Um, and once I was able to let go of control, I realized that my time was better spent actually working on the business itself as opposed to working in the business. So again, I'll use the case of Stodzy, the agency, as an example. Once the labor became, quote, outsourced to my employees, where I wasn't the one actually doing the work anymore, I was able to fully focus on marketing Stodzy as a company, on building the SEO to the website, on getting the contracts and all the paperwork extremely efficient, so that if I had a deal come in, I had a step-by-step process on how to sell that deal and how to get that deal signed. Once I got that deal signed, I built a process where there's an onboarding system. So as soon as somebody contacts me, either through the website or through a referral, and I've built my sales process, then I've also built the onboarding process so that contract's in, the contract gets signed, the deal is in, and you just plop it into the system and it takes off on its own. So with that, with all that extra free time, I really was able to spend my time on things that matter to the actual business of Stodzy. And the funny thing is, in doing that, you give your employees the freedom to make decisions on their own, which means that your actual clients get taken care of better anyway. So it's a win-win. Learning this lesson about delegation was super uncomfortable, super stressful in a lot of ways. I lost sleep over it for sure. I unintentionally kind of created some tension and some friction between myself and my team, just because like I wanted to jump in there, you know, but once I learned that restraint, I freed up my time. If it weren't for that, really, I wouldn't have been able to meet Juliana and build the life that I have now, because when my fiance and I met, I was still living in South Florida and she was living in Boston, and we essentially met through some exchanges on Facebook, on chat, because she had seen my work and kind of reached out to me, and we just kind of kept talking. And if I didn't have the time and the freedom to work on the company, regardless of where I was, I never would have had the availability to fly up to Boston as many times as I did and like actually spend time with her and build that relationship with her that like is really one of the things that I've been most grateful for in my entire life. So let me recap so far, because it's important to see the process, and it's important to understand that for me, I learned these lessons in the perfect order. So again, the first lesson, Mike Thornton's lesson: have your numbers, have your foundation, make more money than you spend. Simple, very simple, but not as easy as it sounds. Because if you don't know how to prepare properly, then you're going to end up losing money. And you're going to lose money on a commitment that you already made. So you still have to complete the work that you're obligated to do. And in fulfilling your obligation, if you didn't do your numbers right, you're going to turn out in the negative. So you wasted time. You lost money, but more importantly, you just wasted however long it took to get the job done, which is essentially a sunk cost and an opportunity cost in the same respect. Learn that lesson. Second lesson, learn the hustle lesson. Looking back, I've written a lot of content and I kind of talk shit on this, millennial hustle mentality. Let me just spend all day taking pictures and I'm just going to write a million blog posts and I'm just going to make videos and I'm going to talk about hustle and I'm going to talk about entrepreneurship. And, I've been pretty vocal about how much of a fucking joke I think a lot of that subculture is. Nonetheless, it would be arrogant and it would be naive of me to pretend like the 5 years of doing really nothing other than working full time, fully committed, 100% all in, no questions asked, didn't have a lot to do with putting me in the position where I was able to build something that I could actually look at and stand on top on, to give myself options to delegate some of the work in the future, which is the third stage and third lesson that I've learned. So in that, I've taken the weekend to really reflect on it all. And I've been thinking to myself what it is that I have to offer and what I can show other people, and how I can use my experience to help other people get to a place that they want to. And I'm reluctant to do that for a few reasons. One, just because I'm a little bit insecure about it. I'm proud of myself and I'm proud of what I've done, but I don't see myself as anything special, really. Why would anybody actually want to listen to me? So Seth Godin would call that the lizard brain. That's the amygdala. That's the survival mechanism in my brain stem telling me that I don't want to go out there and expose myself to other people, because then that makes me vulnerable. And I can recognize that, but that doesn't necessarily make me feel any better. I'm reluctant to do it because I see a lot of con men in this kind of let me help you build a business space, right? That's one of the things about the online entrepreneurial culture that it frustrates me, but it really kind of nauseates me at the same time, because nowhere within these people teaching people how to build a business has anybody actually built a business. So this is like a circle, and it spins around and around, and sometimes I get lost in it. But let me explain this to you real quick. It's not as though somebody built like a carpentry business, I'll use that analogy again, learned the lessons and then applied those lessons to help somebody else build a carpentry business. No, what happens is people just are good at creating content, they're good at creating an audience, and then they sell their business skills to other people who build a business on teaching other people how to build a business, who then build a business on teaching other people how to build a business. And nowhere has a business actually been built. The business is a business of teaching people how to build a business. It's fucking crazy. Anyway, I don't want to be involved in that. And it's easy. Like, I could do that. I could do that pretty easily. I really feel like I could. I know I could. And I could automate the entire thing. Like, I could just sit back and make recurring money without actually doing a whole lot. Oh, sorry about that. But I just don't want to. I wouldn't feel good about that. And I've spent so much time like judging and just kind of being grossed out at that subculture of online marketing coaches that it would be really hypocritical of me. So I don't want to sell courses. I don't want to sell coaching. I want to just continue to provide value to other people so that I can grow for myself. And my hope is that in growing personally, my lessons and conversations that I've had with other people and experiences that I've had and insight from the interviews that I do, I'm hoping that will turn into a body of work within itself. And that body of work can sort of, grow my brand, can grow my influence, if that's even what you want to call it. Essentially, it'll make me an expert of outsourced knowledge. I just want to build this wealth of knowledge from other people. And so finally, that little caveat there kind of takes me to this fourth stage that I'm at, this new phase of me as a businessman and an entrepreneur, and a person just trying to do my best. And this is a stage of just 100% transparency and vulnerability. And I'll tell you what that means, and I'll tell you why that's important to me. So, those first three stages that I've talked about, those lessons have been applied to Sober Nation, to Stodzy, to some of the other kind of lead gen sites I've been involved in, to some of like the other companies that I've worked with that I've invested in or taken small ownership in. But all of that work that I've done, I've always done without making myself the product. I've been very comfortable in this kind of behind the scenes, sort of man behind the curtain type role. And in this project with timstodds.com, with my personal blog, I've really, really, really struggled with this balancing act between like, how much do I write about things that I don't know about compared to like, how much do I display myself as an expert who knows exactly what I'm talking about at all times? And so this fourth stage is this new learning curve for me, in which I'm experimenting and failing a lot at, but also having little minor successes on establishing myself as somebody that can provide value in the online marketing space, in the health and wellness space, in the personal growth space. And I feel that if I just continue to learn from other people, and I continue to be transparent about what it is that I've learned, about what I still have questions about, and about where I plan to go, then just the simple act of being on that journey will land me to new opportunities and will land me in a way that I could potentially monetize myself as a brand and as a person just trying to provide value. And here's the thing, I don't know if it's going to work. I don't know if this is the smart way to do it. I know that if I like created online courses or some kind of coaching program, I could easily monetize it. I know I could create like a mastermind community, right? Like I could do all of that, but I just don't feel that is my calling. I feel like my calling is to do the same thing that I've always done, which is just try my best to help people. And maybe the reward will just be feeling good about helping people. Maybe there'll be some kind of other reward, which I don't even comprehend yet. As an entrepreneur, I just always see revenue streams behind the work that I do. I don't think that's a bad thing, by the way. I don't think that makes me a bad person. I'm not like some, capitalist pig. That's the point of it all. Like that's the point of getting up and going to work in the morning, is to make money from it. And that's who I am, and that's who I plan to be. And I plan fully on continuing to have that thought process and that frame of mind. But I'm also open to being pleasantly surprised on some other kind of reward that could potentially have even greater value than a revenue stream attached to my brand. This was a really, really fun episode to record. I took a couple of minutes when I was mowing the lawn this morning. For those watching the video, if you can see why my hair looks like shit, it's because I was just mowing the lawn and sort of went through this thought process in my head. And I thought about writing it down and like structuring it in a way that might sound a little bit more presentable through the video and through the podcast. But I knew if I just sat here and I started speaking my mind, it would come out the way that it's supposed to. And I really feel like that's what happened here. So here's on to stage 4, right? Here's on to the unknown. Here's to continued success in my life and in your life. And here's to continuing to provide value and to be of service to those around us. Because ultimately, you can look out for yourself, and that's all well and good. But ultimately, we've seen over and over again through my own experiences and through other people's experiences, and it's just a lesson that like never ever seems to be untrue, no matter how hard people try to make it untrue, that if you go out of your way to be of service to other people, things just work out. And that's what I'm going to do here with timstotts.com. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this week's podcast, please hit subscribe on iTunes. Please leave me a rating on iTunes. It's really the best thing you can do to support my show and to support my mission. I appreciate you guys all so much. I will talk to you next week. Have a good one.